Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Dead Man. This film came out in 1995. It was directed by Jim Jarmusch. I think Jim Jarmusch was probably one of those artsy college students who was very perceptive and very talented. He was originally a poet, and he clearly sees the world in that way, in a very poetic way, through abstractions, through a lot of imagery. But through his poetry, he started to see things more and more in a cinematic way, and he felt like he wanted to be able to convey what he was writing in a different way, perhaps visually. And he kind of makes his way through the independent film circuit, and there is naturally a little bit of an open-endedness to his work, and it is off-kilter, almost a mystical expression of emotion. And like I said, it does feel very much like this is an extension of something that he would write as a poet. But Dead Man is definitely a turning point for him, where he's really going for that ambition. It is certainly off the wall, and it has a lot of that similar kind of quirky humor that he's known for, peppered throughout, but there is more of a genre emphasis naturally. Here he is obviously delving into the Western genre, but more specifically the acid Western genre, and perhaps that is to filter a lot of those cliches, a lot of those traditional Hollywood tropes that we would have seen in a lot of classic Westerns. And yes, this does feel like a Western that was maybe made by David Lynch or something. It has that similar type of curiosity, like it's buzzing with this lethargic feeling, and it's lacing everything in a way where you're going to feel disoriented, but that is kind of the key, I think, to arriving at something. It's part of the enlightenment. This movie, in terms of the feeling that it gives me as I watch it, it feels like a very strange, void-like experience. It feels like a purgatory. It's like a wasteland of abstractions, broken pieces of, like I said, classic pop culture, Westerns, things like that. Yet it feels like it's caught in some sort of neo-punk dimension of some sort, and yeah, it just feels very lost, and as though we are high on the fumes of something, but we don't know what. And to me, especially as the film goes on, it's like that feeling of where maybe you took a specific type of drug, a psychedelic drug, and maybe you took too much, but it's too late now. You're going to have to write it out and, see what you arrive at in the end. Because this is a film, I think, about accepting oneself in a lot of different ways. But yeah, in particular, it reminds me of like old fragments of Westerns that are somehow leading us astray in some kind of desert mirage. Is it a deconstruction of Westerns? Yeah, absolutely, I think in some ways, but I also kind of don't like using the word deconstruct necessarily, because I don't know if it's as blatant as that. It feels more like this movie is like a certain formula that we know is slowly dissolving. And elements that were always there that maybe we didn't notice are starting to become more and more visible. Those things go to the forefront. And it does feel very much like one thing is dying and another thing is growing out of that. And there's something really beautiful about it. Like I said, it's a very, very dreamy sort of experience. And it's very much like the unconscious mind is causing all of the fears and dangers that you might repress in your mind to bleed through. And there are all kinds of images. Some can be very natural ones that anybody would recognize, and some can be a little bit more esoteric. But I think overall this film is just naturally, whether it's more of an internal experience for our protagonists or just in general, it's a movie about reflecting on the pain of the past, the guilt of the past. Our main character is certainly reflecting on loss, but I think the film just naturally is a reflection of the pain of American history, especially in like old movies of the 1930s, when you see like all that real garish makeup and the way that certain people are stereotyped and such. Big Westerns that defined America in a certain way, in a mainstream way. It's almost like a wax museum tour at Madame Tussauds or something like that, which has always really, really creeped me out. That whole thing feels very haunting to me, and I think artifice in general can have a very creepy feeling to it. And I think people like Jarmusch or like David Lynch really capitalize on all of that. Something that can seem very artificial and very removed, and then we probe it to find more surreal things beneath it. I think that's very interesting. I love that this film feels very simple, but yet there's this very small thread of emotion at the beginning that you can feel stringing it together, however faint it might be, but it's going to grow in a really satisfying way. One can interpret the film in all kinds of ways. It definitely has like a Mulholland Drive quality to it, or even something like Carnival of Souls reminds me of that as well, where you are seeing a world unravel and be reframed. Is it a dream? I don't really know. Is it a transition between life to death? Or is this a purgatory that our character is trapped in? I think in the very opening scene, it's mentioned that we're making the descent into hell. And even if our main character doesn't realize this, he's going to go on this very, very existential journey in order to discover something about himself and something, I think, about the world before he leaves it. And he will do it through a very altered state as he's looking at all these very, interesting, iconic images of landscapes and black and white cinematography. Certainly recognizable actors that we all know, recognizable stereotypes and twists on those stereotypes that are very interesting. And it's always keeping you suspended in this air of questions and strangeness and definitely alienation. And the descent into hell, I think, is important just because I think clearly our character has experienced things in his life or has done things in his life, committed acts that perhaps he hasn't faced yet or understands the seriousness of them. Or maybe he just hasn't taken the time to really meditate on it, to repent for the wrongs. And, it takes him time to kind of figure out exactly what those wrongs are. There are many, many important images in this film and ones that always stick with you, or at least they do for me. But certainly a very important image for me is the shot of him, floating away on the boat. And that's kind of the feeling, the mood the mood that this movie gives me is just like, it's like you're being carried away by a tide. It's deceptively powerful and meaningful in terms of how it forces you to look at certain things, especially serious things, in the midst of a lot of that colorful humor. To me, there's a very progressive energy to the film, and yet I love that it's combined with that stale quality as well. It's very elevated and very modern, yet it is obviously very esoteric, as I've said. The classic Lone Ranger cliche or theme that you might be used to seeing might be, in this instance, maybe more dazed, more wigged out, more dissonant. And I think a lot of this comes out in the score, really. I love the score to this. I love the improvisational quality to it because I think it fits the attitude of the film for sure, the way that it meanders. But it also captures this really sinking feeling, just I guess maybe like the weight of time or something, knowing that there is a responsibility, I think, throughout the entire film. You feel it in the music, knowing in the end that no matter what's going on, you have to find it in your heart to let go. I give Johnny Depp a lot of credit here as the central character. He has a sort of Buster Keaton sort of deadpan humor here. And I think people naturally, when they think of Johnny Depp, they think of, like he's a chameleon or he's like a very eccentric character actor and all of that. But to me, I think he's a very underrated comedic actor. He has a great sense of just body language. He knows how to use his body very well, and he's very expressive, but in a way that is very subtle. He's very subtle in this film. And I think partially because it is such an existential journey, you need that blank slate of sorts, kind of like like Martin Sheen in Apocalypse Now. He has a quality to him where you can kind of project yourself onto him. With Johnny Depp, I think it's the earnestness and a very shy sort of sweetness as well that is just appealing, especially for Depp. I just think that the 90s are his most expressive, his most creative period. It is the golden age of Johnny Depp. Some might argue that it's maybe the early 2000s with Pirates of the Caribbean and the Depp Renaissance, but I disagree. Maybe not from a money point of view, but from an artistic point of view. It was in the 90s that he was making his most challenging work, the most versatile and very risky choices, and I think they all turned out to be great choices, as we've seen. A lot of those are classics or cult classics. He seems like somebody who would get a part like this or get a story like this and really understand maybe Jarmusch's point of view. And I think he understands that the character does need to appear very kind of calm, very passive, but there is going to be a deceptiveness there. There is an air of mystery. He does appear to be more the relatable victim instead of somebody that is looking for some sort of penance. His character is William Blake, of course, and he's on the way to a new town in order to get a new job. But once he gets there, he realizes that the job is no longer available to him, and he ends up getting involved with a lady, and her ex-boyfriend gets jealous, and she ends up getting shot. He ends up shooting him. It's a whole ordeal, and it all happens in a very jolting way. Of course, William Blake is not the famous poet William Blake. He's just a guy with a name, with the same name. But that name does mean something to the Native American character named Nobody. And this guy loves the poetry of William Blake, and so naturally he sees this guy and mistakes him for the great poet. And I don't think it's a surprise to say that Nobody is my favorite character in the film, and I think it's a lot of people's favorite character. He's just a fantastic character. He is a symbol of all the rejected aspects, I think, of Native American life, especially as it is portrayed on screen, and certainly how American history is often viewed. There's just kind of a stereotypical nature to all of it, and hence the name Nobody, never really being treated as a human or being treated as someone who deserves any sort of attention. I love that his character is so gentle, is so sweet. There is a lovely positivity to his voice that I find to be really infectious, but there's also a real wiseness to him. He's naturally, like the Virgil to William Blake's Dante, I guess. He is a mentor that is guiding our character towards the closure that he seeks. But yet both characters gain a lot from each other, and I think that's, one of the main keys to it. Even Nobody, we're not really sure. Maybe if he didn't know that William Blake was just a nobody, it wasn't the person that he thought he was, that he would drop him instantly. But I don't know, somehow I certainly don't think so. I think he would be willing to help him very early on, regardless of who he was. And I like the idea of two people who have nothing in common, or seemingly nothing in common, completely misreading each other, perhaps based on typical ways they are perceived. But it turns out that they actually mirror each other a lot more than they realize. And there are a lot of mirroring elements in the film. They get subverted in some way, or where like the roles are getting switched around depending on the scenario. And again, it creates a new examination of things. And it's slowly kind of shedding the material world, I think. And at times that poetry, especially, the black and white cinematography and everything, just the visual poetry of it, it reminds me of like I don't know, like an Ingmar Bergman film or something. It's maybe that insistence on silence that I really like. It's on focusing on those beautiful moments and not lingering on any sort of words, yet the air is thick with meaning. Like seeing the wounded animal just lying there, and William Blake goes and lies next to it. I thought that was a beautiful, gentle, aching moment, and I think, you can interpret that, again, in many different ways, depending on how you view his life and how you view the story. Perhaps some people don't gain what I do out of a lot of those symbols, out of those abstractions. I know there are people that do see it as maybe being a little bit too thin, or like the structure is not able to support all the themes and the heaviness that it's going for, but like I said, I strongly disagree with that. I feel like everything here has a meaning to it. You may have to see it multiple times in order to get all of that, but I feel like everything really makes sense in the big scheme of things, and pretty much everything that is introduced is paid off at a certain point, or is looked at in a different way later on. Perhaps a dream framework can make it feel like nothing is really that meaningful, or nothing is concrete, but I actually think that it's the abstractions there that are going on that are allowing for more kind of darker emotions to be revealed. When you strip away maybe your typical reactions, the normal way that you might palate something, especially entertainment, I think you can suddenly gain a new perspective on it. And that's why these kinds of movies, when they're done well, like this one is, they tend to be, for me, some of the most meaningful films out there. Because what could be more meaningful than gaining a perspective on one's life, especially in this way? Seeing it objectively and repenting for one's sins and finding the true strength to be able to let go of the world that you've known. Because personally, I do feel like from the moment that the film begins, the passing is already taking place, as in the transition from life to death is already in motion. Like I said at the beginning, it's like, oh crap, I took too many drugs, more than I intended. Well, it's too late now. You've got to write it out. But it's, I guess, how you write it out becomes the important thing, and what you gain from that. As I said before, I think for Jarmusch, this is maybe his most ambitious work, and I think one of his most important, one of his most memorable. And I do think it is one of the best films of the 1990s. I think it is just such a special, personal, artistic piece of filmmaking. It's so quirky, and one of those things, I can just imagine myself in the 90s walking into a theater and just being pleasantly surprised at what I see here. A real acid-tinged art house piece that both embellishes a lot of these existing concepts while also stripping away those facades simultaneously. I think that everyone should see this film. I think cinephiles should see it. I think just the casual moviegoer should see this. Even if you're not into movies but you love art, if you're just a naturally curious person, whether you like it or not, I still think that you can gain something from it. So yeah. That's my recommendation. But yeah, that's my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commission portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I want to give a shout out to my patrons who are wonderful. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you're interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.